Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Factory TV. I am here with my beloved and best friend Stoll, who has celebrated his 50th year of work and time served here at the Private White VC factory here in Manchester. And so many of you are always reaching out to myself and to Mike, wanting to know more about his thoughts, his feelings about everything and anything. So we're going to have a little session here in the factory store, which Mike remembers to being his office back in the, when was this?
Well, before the pre-95, from 84 to 95.
So this was his office. It's over the past, I think, 7 years ago, Her Royal Highness Princess Anne opened the store. It's available 5 days a week, by the way. Yeah, so Michael, how does it feel to have spent best part of half a century in this same building?
It's when you actually get the 50 up, that's a different thing. I think when you started, it was like 35.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a long time.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're 15, I'm 50, and I'm thinking, was this madness? Should I be doing something else? Have I missed something? Or was this a worthwhile...
But you love it though, don't you?
I do love it. I've not been happy. I've not been here this year through the first illness I've ever had. It's been horrible, and I am wanting to do more, not less.
And what is it that you love about this place? What is it, if you can quantify?
What happens is you get into a groove where you can't bear for something not to be getting better, and you certainly go hysterical if it gets worse. So you get into a system like you're playing in a football team, and you've got to win every game because you have to win the league, but you want to win it every single year. So you never want to have a lapse in what you're doing. You want it to improve, and then you want the European Cup. In my case, the European Cup would be a new factory next door, modern and shiny. So there's always another ambition. It's like empire building. You can't stop. If you start with something and your empire gets bigger because of the politics at different times, then it goes smaller, then you want it back to where it was, then something better comes along and you want it back to where it was with the better. So you're never really off the...
But you have got quite a, for those that don't know Mike, you're quite an obsessive, quite a fanatical, detail-driven, I want to say lunatic, but that sounds like I'm being negative.
I think the truth is that I didn't start off as a driven lunatic. I think I started off as somebody who wanted to be a footballer or a model. But having put in the first 15 years, fighting through the 80s, looking at the ridiculous politics of closing down 350 factories and seeing the docks shut and the mines close and people having to reinvent themselves as taxi drivers and moving out of the area and all this transformation we had. Once you've done that 15 years, you're in. I think that's the thing. Once you're in, you're in. And I think, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think you're now in your first 15 years, I think you're in. I think you've got a problem. I think you're going to have a problem getting out.
I think it's a bit like that famous scene in Godfather 3. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. No, because there's always the next challenge. You know, with the factory, we're always looking to grow it, take on more people. It never stops. The moment, you know, the growth or indeed the progression and building up the factory. It's just a constant.
The wonderful thing this time is that we're not just building the factory, where we're relying on Debenhams or House of Fraser or Take 6 or Danair or British Caledonian to give us work when they are susceptible to going out of business. We're trying to build a unit that will last 100 years, whoever comes along and takes it over, because it is self-sustainable. So if we've got 100 people now, it's probably more valuable than the 400 odd people I had in the 90s, because that was built on ice. This is building foundations to last.
So just tell us a bit about life in the 90s as a garment maker. It must have been brutal.
Well, the brutal bit was the 80s. The brutal bit was when there was 300 factories going down to 60 factories, who were all wealthier than I was, all wanted to stay in business. The third generation people that owned the buildings, that had tremendous assets elsewhere that they could flog and sell to fight to stay in business, thinking there was something left, whilst at the same time the imports were coming in. The 90s were a lot easier because literally we got down to 5 factories at the beginning of the 90s, and the people who were buying British were buying British. We'd found our angles, and new Paul Smiths and Roger Sauls at Mulberry were coming along, and they wanted to make in Britain and they couldn't find a factory. So the few years in the 90s from 88 to 99, we actually made a lot of money and we did very, very well. The staff went from 60 to 350 going on 400 and it was going very, very well. When the plug got pulled in the with the strong pound in 97 and the gradual deterioration to you being brave enough to come in and step in 2007, that was a tricky period. So, you know, in reality, there's been a lot of lows with a very sharp spike that was the 90s. So it's been a different thing. And in that sharp spike, we spent all our money putting a new roof on the building, pointing all the bricks, getting the offices moved, buying some new equipment. So the 90s was good, but it didn't sustain long enough. But this private white VC, with its website owning its own customers, relying on no outside forces or splitting them down to I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of customers you've got, that feels like it's worth going to the grave to fight for. That's the way I feel about it.
In the 1990s, it was a very, very strong pound, which is, well,
Now,
in
a
stark
weak pound,
contrast to what we're
correct.
finding currently. So I'm not sure whether it's a weak pound, but a super strong dollar. And that's got to be advantageous to us, I would have thought.
Massively. You can't operate when the pound is stronger than what the Deutschmark was or any other currency. It's all it is for importing. You need a balance. Now, it could be $1.25 to the pound and it would still be okay. But if it goes to 150, you know, it's a different game. They just can't afford us at that point. So
you know, so if you think back to the kind of product you were making in the 80s, 90s, how does that compare and contrast with what we're doing today?
I think the 80s and 90s were an apprenticeship for what we're doing today. I think when Mulberry came along around about the end of the 80s, 87, 88, with their fanatical attention to detail, which now I wouldn't even think was fanatical, because our attention to detail is far more fanatical than theirs was back then. But it was a shock to me that people were coming in here trying to build a better raincoat than Burberry, and with new ideas, the Gore-Tex drop line or whatever, to go above the Burberry price in this what was then a shabby factory, which is now not a shabby factory. So it was interesting to see how Paul Smith and these people wanted to revolutionise us, and it was a huge learning curve. It was an apprenticeship for everything. All the fabrics we established then, the Ventiles, the Melton for the Peacoat, were done during that era. And they've had 20 years to bed in, which is where the surprise element came when Private White started. And people, where have they come from? How have they done this? It's that long run up to establishing the product.
And what would you say is your favourite garment?
I love the raincoat. I did 30 years without doing anything but the raincoat. So the Ventile Mac is the favourite, the Ventile Harrington. We made an awful lot for Barracuda in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and early noughties, and perfected that Harrington. But always in not such great fabrics, making it in the Ventile gives me a lot of satisfaction.
And of course, that was one of your crazy projects, the tape seaming of Ventile.
Yeah, that was the innovation I did originally for the shooting world, where they wanted something light, waterproof and thorn-proof. Well, the Ventile, you can't rip it, you can't tear it, it's waterproof, but it was heavy because you used to have to do it double layered, two layers offset seams. When we realised, or when I came up with the Gore-Tex seam tape to go onto that shut the seams down and the fabric swelling in the wet conditions, well, that was a revelation. It meant you could have a single layer, lightweight garment, always looks smart, always regains its shape, but half the price of a lot of raincoats, designer raincoats, are showerproof as a waterproof Mac.
What would you've had 50 years been and gone, what are you excited for the future?
I want to see that new factory built. I want to see this place becoming an iconic shop, design centre, just an interesting building full of interesting things, with a space age. The website here would be marvellous, photography studio marvellous, but I'd like to see a factory where the goods go in one end, come out the other, like everybody's been wanting for years.
Is there any message you want to broadcast to guys that are thinking about buying a private white garment but haven't quite yet taken the plunge?
I think that if they're living locally, and I'm going out and since my problems this year, I'm going out to reach out to people all over. Come and find out why our Peacoat is £750. Compare it to a £350. Actually find out that it will last you twice as long. See how it's made.
More than twice as long.
More than twice as long. See how strong the seams are. See how good the lining quality is. See what fusibles we use in it. Understand why British is best. Not just sneer at the price and walk away. Come and do the tour. If you're not happy after the tour, walk away and go, actually, I don't believe you, I don't like it. Look, I'm wearing this wonderful rag that I bought on the high street and I'm very happy with it, I'll swap it next year. But at least have the opportunity to come and give us the chance of showing you what we've built over the, not 50 years, because it was 50 or more years before me, what they've been doing here for 100 years.
Thanks for that, Mike. You know, we could probably talk for hours, and you often do, about your thoughts and overall musings to life of the world. But yeah, see, our Stoll is not short of opinions or indeed insight, but we're blessed to have him, and we're very, very fortunate, and here's to the next 50.